what skin people, constituents have in the game. And it's not Democrats that are going to be against you. You're going to have to be able to talk to Republicans and why it's going to benefit everyone. That's part of why I see a tribal culture being set up. That's what Fox does. That's what social media algorithms do. And the people that just want to rail and rant against taxes, they aren't going to talk about the infrastructure that it's supposed to go to. And they certainly aren't going to talk about the fact that 45% of the energy that the carbon fuel industry produces right now would not be cost effective without the subsidies. And if you don't think that's slowing down and retarding the development of wind and solar, that's something we need to talk about. And we need to get, once again, get out of our bubbles. Hey, this got put in my hand first, so I
Roger, is there a time limit for each presentation?
I'm just going to try to manage that as I can. And when we get to Q&A from the audience, I was going to say, you can address a question to a specific candidate if you like, or you can just ask a general question like I just did. So, Ron, you want to, and we'll probably have for the general questions, we'll probably have a candidate and then maybe 2 follow-ups at the most. We'll see how that goes. So, Ron?
So I think, when it comes to taxes, I don't know the details about this bill because it's a state level initiative. But in general, we need to be very careful when we want to raise taxes. Because in my opinion, our government is already wasting a lot of money. And every single time they make a mistake somewhere, they raise taxes to pay for it, and they say it's temporary. We'll take it back down again, but it doesn't seem to ever work that way. So don't get me wrong, I'm not against taxes, I'm just against wasteful spending. And so I think that it needs to be explained where this money is going, and it has to be spent on what it says it's being spent on. I don't want it to go and be spent on, let's advertise on TV, the taxes are good, and you know what I'm saying, we don't need to reallocate the funds received from this tax to anything else but what it was promised to do, which is infrastructure, and hopefully reduce carbon compression. So, to me, that's my 2 cents.
You wanted to comment on this also?
Yep.
Yeah. Yours will be the final comment.
Oh, Roger.
Can I
Comment quickly as well? Okay. Sure. So I actually tweeted about this when the news came out in the LA Times. I said, here's a thought, maybe California Republicans like Mimi Walters could bring federal dollars back for roads and bridges so California state doesn't have to. This is really about our federal representatives not bringing back money for infrastructure. We have crumbling roads and bridges, we have to fix them. And when people like Mimi Walters and Darrell Issa refuse to bring money back, it's effectively a tax increase on us. We are a net donor state, we're a net donor community, and so whether it's roads and bridges or whether it's 21st century infrastructure, Mimi Walters continues to refuse to bring money back to our district, to our state. She votes against it, whether it's high-speed rail, roads and bridges, and the like. And so we are forced to do this. So yes, we need a change in leadership because we ought to be investing in California's infrastructure going forward.
So let me ask the audience a question on this. About how much money is this huge tax going to cost the average Californian? Just call it out. Well, we know 12 cents a gallon, but it's on an annual basis.
$90.
About $90. Anybody else?
Depends on how much you drive.
Obviously,
It
yeah.
goes to the logistics business, truck drivers.
Right. The average
wear and tear on the
Californian.
road.
All right, I figured it out, and it's about $120. Okay, $120 a year, $10 a month, and the Republicans are calling this the biggest tax increase in the history of California. They like to advertise it as a $1 billion tax increase, but when you divide it up among all the Californians, it's $10 a month for the average Californian. I have a man named Travis Allen in my assembly district who is running on this issue for governor. And I'm now calling him Travis Free Lunch Allen. Everybody wants a free lunch, right? It seems especially the Republicans. But if you can't afford to pay $10 a month extra for all the roads and highways you use in this state, and I suggest you move back in with your parents, because it's only $10 a month. And it's ridiculous. What's that?
2 Starbucks a month.
2 Starbucks a month, a couple packs of cigarettes, however you want to add up this money. It's nothing. And how long has it been since we've had a gas tax increase? 20 years, 30 years? This is overdone? It's ridiculous.
I'm glad I asked that question. Okay, I'm sure we've got other questions out here, and what I'm going to do is, be careful, it bonks when you set on. I'm going to call on people, and I'm going to try to bring the mic out so that you can come up to the mic to ask your question. So, who's got a question? What's that?
Yeah. Do you mind if I just stay here for, I'm just confused.
Do you mind using the mic so we can get it on video? Yeah.
So hello, my name is Jose, and my question is for the candidates of District 48. And so maybe you have been wary of this question, but it's on Poseidon. And if you have a position on Poseidon, and what are the details that you know about it? I was asked to ask this question from Victor Valladares, and I hope that you can answer it as fully as possible.
Try to take about 3 responses on that.
Okay. Not all of us.
Volunteers? Well,
Sure.
yeah, I mean, it's just in the interest of time and, you know, the prep for the
I can
questions.
be pretty quick on this. Poseidon, you know, I did look at all of the environmental paperwork on Poseidon, and I read the reports that were offered to the Coastal Commission. It was a travesty without the filters. They then changed the filters. They added a filter. It was still environmentally horrific. They then decreased the diameter of the filter to stop the detriment on the environment for the majority of the life in the sea in the about a 2-mile radius around the park. So where it stands now is that it's actually been approved by the Coastal Commission, but it needs to be consistently monitored because the effect on the environment is actually unknown. It's hypersalination of the area, and it's a microbial devastation in the 2 kilometers or so of 2 miles or so around the pipe exit. So it needs to be constantly monitored so that it could be either regulated or shut down if it needs to be.
So we're talking about desalination here locally. When we go through the droughts like we have to have homegrown solutions, and I do think this is one we need to support, similar to the way that we needed to subsidize and support the solar industry in its infancy. I think to Hans' point, we need to keep an eye on it. The brine runoff is a concern, the pipes sucking in, the ecosystem is obviously a concern, but when we have 25% of the country's fruits and vegetables coming from California, the country cannot afford to have us go through severe drought. So we need to do a lot, right? We need to work on our water reservoir systems, we need to work on a lot of other solutions. But if we can keep a good eye on these guys as they're doing it, I think it's in our best interest. I'd also like to see a little bit more competition than just one company, but that's the important thing.
Omar, you haven't spoken yet.
And, you know, anyone who can stay afterwards can follow up on with the questions that they want. So, oh, Laura, okay. Okay.
In theory.
Let's let it go.
I have
We
nothing
got
against-
Laura and Omar, and then Tony, you wanted to say something too, right?
I just turned myself on. Fair enough, okay. In theory, I wouldn't have anything against a desal plant, but this one is using old, outdated technology. It is going to kill marine life. It is going to pollute our marine habitat. It's massively expensive, $1 billion plus. There are some things that they could do. They could, instead of pulling in the water through these pipes that are big, they're big enough to drive a truck through, they could do these infiltration galleries, which would actually submerge it under the sand. But they claim that that's too expensive. They can't do it. So no, I've done a lot of homework on this. I've done my research on it, and I'm coming out against Poseidon.
I've had
long hours of research, brainstorming as an engineer and as an attorney, the benefits and disadvantages of having a Poseidon plant. The problem that we have is that the union laborers love this project. When I met with the Teamsters at 6 a.m. the other day, they were adamant that how important this was for jobs in Orange County. They were trying to sell me on this project. And I don't disagree that this plant would bring tons of jobs. However, my response to them was, if we are going to build something, we don't want to build something that's not going to work to the best use for our county. In analyzing this, I think it's a bad deal for consumers. I think it undermines California's climate goals. I think there are other water supply options, conservation options we need to take into consideration. However, as a lawyer, one thing I look at is precedence. How does a company act? And as many of you may know, the Carlsbad desalination plant has failed to deliver a fifth of the water that was promised to the San Diego County Water Authority. So as such, based on that precedent, I think the developers of Poseidon have a lot of questions to answer before I will get behind that project at all.
We're running out of cord, Tony, so you might have to come this way.
Always the lone man. So I've been against the Poseidon project since the get-go, since I started my campaign in April. I made the effort to read several newspaper articles in the LA Times and OC Register about this project and other projects that have been in California. I've also talked to Ray Hemster of Orange County Coastkeeper, and he gave me the background on the Poseidon project. Basically, in Huntington Beach, we don't need desalinization. We have a large underground aquifer that is mostly full. A lot of these desalination plants have been built and then mothballed after the droughts have ended, and they realized that they didn't need them anymore. They use a lot of electricity to make the water. They hurt the environment as they put the salty brine back into the ocean. And it's expensive water that we would have to have a contract for to purchase. Now, it might only make the average Californian, and I'm always focused on the average Californian, $20 a month on his water bill. But if you're a business that uses a lot of water, it could cost you a lot more. So I'm against the Poseidon project, and I plan on remaining that way.
Questions? And you're next. Can you come this way a bit?
Yeah, sure.
I'm tripping over the spaghetti there.
Hi, my name's Bill. I'd just like to throw this out as a general question, if anybody would like to comment on the differences and how you might view the national and international, perhaps, implications of cap and trade versus just a simple carbon tax versus what Mr. Reiser was referring to, which would be a carbon fee and dividend.
Kia?
Yeah, I'm supportive of the carbon fee and dividend. One of the things we saw with cap and trade in 2010, I believe, when it was trying to be passed in the Senate is, one, I think it's generally too complicated for people to understand. Two, what you saw is a lot of industry giveaways to try to win off senators in swing states or states with a huge industrial operation. I think a carbon tax is best because it's simple, it's easy to understand, it's the most effective way of actually bringing down the amount of carbon. I prefer to see a dividend, one, because we don't want to see the taxes go up for any middle-class family in Orange County or anywhere else. And I also would like to see some of it invested in green energy technology and whatnot. And ideally, I think you would do that internationally as well. But obviously, we have to start in America, and we have to be the leader for the entire world.
Yeah, could you explain the fee and dividend just a bit?
Yeah, so the fee and dividend is essentially you put a price on carbon, and then it is returned to people after the fact. So everyone will get a check in the mail for X amount based on how much you raised off the dividend. The idea being that if you are a middle-class family in this country, or you are working class or lower income, you would actually not see a tax increase at all. Because you're not sure, we don't want to hurt those families while trying to save the environment, which is absolutely critical that we do. Thank you.
Anyone else?
So Michael believes that cap and trade is really good progress. However, it does pose a disadvantage for Californians that are of lower economic status, because those companies that tend to take advantage of that cap and trade do tend to congregate in the areas of Californians that are less fortunate. So in short, Michael is actually more in support of carbon dividends. He believes that there's more of a bipartisan flavor to it because, well, you know, I mean, we're not really going to have a fully democratic executive branch and Congress for a while, so we do need to have bipartisan efforts, and we need to go across the aisle. And because of that, Michael is very much in favor of that. It also reduces the amount of leakage, so carbon leakage going across international borders, so preventing U.S. companies from going across borders and importing their goods back into the U.S. by imposing a greater import tax does reduce the amount of leakage, and that's another thing that Michael is in favor of.
Just following on those comments, you know, I come from a housing banking background, and so the attempts to try to regulate carbon emissions are very similar to the efforts to coordinate international banking standards. I know it sounds like a far field, but I think to Kia's point, I mean, cap and trade having that complexity always makes it more difficult to coordinate between countries. So in theory, of course, a carbon tax or a carbon dividend and fee and dividend would be a cleaner approach, right? And then fee and dividend, I think, which CCL has proposed, would have the added benefit of having that political flavor where people really start getting used to those checks. On the other hand, I do think timing is imperative. So it is, as I mentioned earlier, to me the most important thing is what can we get done most quickly, more so than hashing out the perfect solution. So in theory, I'd agree with I forget her name, and Kia, but sorry, Kelly, sorry. Nice to meet you.
That's okay, I'm not where Michael is.
Michael's representative, but you know, I do think that this is an emergency waiting to happen, and I think you heard people say, you know, we are probably past the threshold of that 2-degree increase, and so we need to really get moving as quickly as possible.
That's Mike down.
Thank you. So, in order for us to get to 100% renewable, which Brian Ford, as I mentioned, is unequivocally supportive of, it's important that we bring everyone along. So, again, in theory, carbon taxes sound good, but people, regardless of income, need to be able to participate. We're not going to be able to do this unless we are able to bring everyone along. My current research that I'm wrapping up here at UC Irvine, we're working on a solar-powered microgrid for 10,000 people, low income in Huntington Beach. And I see Brian's own experience with his developing business models that work for people of all incomes. Nicaragua doesn't matter which country. I see that he understands this issue, and whatever policy that we do end up putting forward, we make sure that everyone participates and it doesn't hurt the working families here in California. Thank you.
Dave?
I haven't quite figured out exactly the best way to frame this. And I will resist labels for myself. I heard that this gentleman in particular bring up the problem or the issue of big money. So I want to center, I don't know whether anybody can say anything further, some of these questions are centered on it, but I wonder whether you have comments that can help instruct us and educate us as to how we can get the very pressing things done as you're talking about climate, without making for-profit businesses more profitable.
But how we can get the important things done without making for-profit businesses more profitable? Does it have to be that way? Yeah, I mean, okay, does that clarify a little bit? Yeah.
I guess, you know, the way I look at things, and if you go to UC, you know, we're obviously very close to UC Irvine, But when you talk to scientists at UC Irvine, what many of them will tell you is that they believe, and I haven't found any like hard metrics on this, but I think it matches up intuitively with what I believe, that every major technological boom of the last 100 years comes directly or indirectly out of federally funded research. And that money sometimes goes to big companies, but a lot of it goes to entrepreneurs, goes to new businesses, goes to new technology. And I think that's the type of, businesses making money I would support, as opposed to the subsidies to existing businesses. I think part of what you're talking about is a transition away from fossil fuel companies towards next generation technologies. And I would hope that that would sort of shift us away from the idea that I think that you find distasteful is big oil is giving lots of money to help shape policies in its favor, right? I guess what I'm proposing, what I think you're hearing from other people is something really ambitious where we're looking to use federal funds and incentives to try to trigger some kind of 21st century energy technological boom and create that efficiency, create that next generation of technology, and that will certainly make people wealthy. But that's the dot-com boom. That's every major technological boom we've had. Somebody's going to get those benefits, but at the same time, I think we society all benefit even more.
I was going to frame this question, by the way, as public financing versus for-profit. Sure. But go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think what there's going to be, look, I'm not trying to put anyone out of business, I'm not trying to, to destroy anyone's company, but if we do what we need to do on climate change, there's obviously going to be a real rebalancing in terms of how this is set up. And I think one of the most dangerous worst things that Hillary Clinton said during the campaign last year is when she went to West Virginia and said, we're going to put a lot of coal miners out of business. And that was a very bad thing to say because those communities have been devastated by the loss of those jobs. And absolutely, we need to address the fact that we're burning so much coal. It's a dirty, dirty fuel, but we need to make sure that we're there for those people who lose those jobs and make sure that they have somewhere to go and they're not felt like they've been forgotten. The other thing is, hopefully, when this investment in green energy, we're going to have a huge boom in green energy jobs. So again, it's a rebalancing towards different industries, which are providing the clean energy that we need. But I also think it's addressing what you said about the money in politics and Citizens United and the corruptive influence of money in our politics from our oil companies, and what you see, what Mimi Walters and so many other Republicans in Orange County getting so much money in oil, gas, and voting with them every single time.
Alex, and then Hans.
Yeah, so somewhat address your question. I think it's important to understand that in mature economies, as our economies begin to slow, new markets develop when there is disruptive innovation. And 80% of our economy right now is still run by hydrocarbons. And so this shift to renewable energy allows opportunity for all. And I think it allows for that class mobility and that small business innovation that America is renowned for. And I think that would speak to, I think, your concerns, and that is this inequality and consolidation of wealth. Our investments in public financing of renewable energy opens the door for working families and entrepreneurs.
Firstly, I'd like to just be clear that I support End Citizens United.
Support?
End Citizens United to prohibit the big money in politics. I think that the core of your question really does address where innovation actually happens. And as a serial entrepreneur, I have to say that boons for entrepreneurs, for small companies innovating new technologies are where we need to be putting our efforts and our monies. Not that cap and trade in California is the perfect system, but it does provide $1.6 billion between now and 2020 to the Green Energy Fund, which is distributed to innovation research and basic research. And between 2020 and 2030, it will provide $26 billion for use in California on renewable energies, and 30% of that has to be new and economically disadvantaged areas. So that principle is a good one. Whichever way we end up going, we have cap and trade right now. We need to continually investigate and make sure that we've got the optimal program, but every single one of them that makes it to the table for decision has to include such monies for burgeoning industries in green energy.
Questions? Yes, Elizabeth, right?
Hello, thank you all for coming. I'm a voter in the 45th district, and I just wanted to say, because there's renewable energy and all these big ideas when it needs to be sustainable and climate change, but there's a lot we can do in our daily action to try to fight climate change. So I just want to ask some general questions. When you raise your hand, it's a yes, but how many of you have solar panels on your house?
We're getting there.
How many of you drive an electric or hybrid car? How many of you try to limit your meat intake or plant-based diet?
Limiting your meat intake and doing all that.
Yeah. Thank you.
I would have failed in none of those tests. I have a deposit on a Tesla Model 3 and I'm about number 375,000. And the way to get solar is community choice energy. That's one of the things that we're trying to talk about. We got community choice. We won't necessarily all need to put solar panels on our own roofs, but that's good too. Questions? This is good. Sir.
Hello, my name is Mohammed Awai. I'm the President CEO of the Renewable Energy Company. So I'm very excited to be here. My question is, I know the whole country is focusing on the Twitter garages that we get every day. But below it, beneath it, and there's a very strong effort by the EPA, the DOE, to undermine a lot of regulations that protects the environment. Example is the Department of Energy just is asking for, it's a bit technical, so that is to introduce basically the ability for the market, the energy market, to pay extra to nuclear and coal plants so they can, keep them alive. And so this is a concrete example that is happening. So my question, if you are elected to Congress, what are you going to do to stop this kind of undermining of the regulation that protects the environment?
Alex first.
So, if I have the name of the company's called, it's Seniva and Solar World, right? We're putting forth this issue in front of the Federal Trade Commission. So, luckily here in the state of California, there's a lot of redundant institutions that have been built into place, just in case someone like Donald Trump, or Trump showed up in the White House. So, I think we can work through the California Energy Commission, the CPUC, CalISO, and find our own path forward. We've had greater subsidies for solar panels in the past in the state of California, and that may be a way to counter what's currently going on in the White House. This is an issue I hadn't dove in, fully with Brian Ford yet, and it's certainly something that I think is worth exploring as a way to counter what's going on in the White House. I don't think that's an insurmountable challenge. And I think it speaks of a special importance here to the state of California, given the fact that solar employs some 100,000 people. So it's a huge employer to our state, and definitely something Brian Ford would protect.
Looks like we're going to rip right up the line here with District 45. So Kia next.
Yeah, I think the point you made about the Twitter garage is really what they do is distract from all the regulations that Scott Pruitt and Rick Perry and all those people are repealing day and day and day. This is probably the most anti-environmental administration we've ever seen in this United States. And when I worked for Senator Harkin, one of the things I did was oversight and investigations. And through that, we were able to bring down the entire for-profit college industry without ever passing a law, because we were able to bring attention to these problems. There was Louis Brandeis who said that sunlight makes the best disinfectant. And the best thing we can do as members of Congress when we don't have the presidency is shame them time and time again, shame them into doing the right thing, expose what they're doing, because people do respond to that. And my hope is that when I get elected to Congress, there'll be a Democratic Senate, there'll be a Democratic House, and we'll be able to hold them account through the appropriation process, be able to pass laws that make sure that they cannot do these things. Thank you.
Mimi Walters, who represents the 45th District here, actually is on the Energy and Commerce Oversight Committee. And so she's exactly doing the opposite of what Kia is mentioning, which is she should be holding hearings. You remember they held hearings on also Benghazi, everything, and they really ought to be dragging Pruitt in there every day for something. And that at least can slow down the progress that they're trying to, or I guess the regress that they're trying to make.
This didn't start with Donald Trump. We've been messing up this industry for a long time. Dirty energy has been getting subsidized for decades. If you remove the subsidies of all the dirty energy companies and all the other contributing factors to the environmental damages that we're receiving this last few decades, you will actually find that solar is a lot more competitive. It can actually compete toe-to-toe with dirty energy. So, and if you strip it one step further, follow the money, it's always been money in politics. That's the main reason. If we don't eliminate money in politics, all these things that we want done, namely climate change reform and man's contribution to climate change, it's got to be money in politics. And someone mentioned Citizens United. That's just the tip of the iceberg. You've got to go further back. There's an organization that I'm a huge fan of, a big supporter of, it's called MoveToAmend.org. MoveToAmend.org. Look it up on your own. It's phenomenal. They want to take this thing all the way back to, because this all started with the clerical error back in the 1800s. And they've used that as precedence to make these stupid decisions that they're making now. So this needs to get stripped back, and it can only be done by Congress. We have to make a constitutional amendment to reform and put public financing in elections again.
Foreign countries for energy, that's a national security issue. That's a national security risk. Our nation needs to be independent of foreign entities for its energy sources. The government, Congress, the White House need to specifically allow market-based incentives for our businesses here at home first. Many of our congressmen favor foreign interests. Dana Rushbacker, a lot of these other congressmen are now not favoring homegrown companies such as yours to provide alternative energy sources. Now, Elon Musk very recently has made a comment that if subsidies were taken away from oil or coal, he wouldn't want any subsidies for solar or renewable energy, and he feels he can compete, and I believe him. I think he can. And I think if you have entrepreneurs and innovators like Elon Musk, like Howard Hughes of the past, like the other innovators, we as Americans can achieve, and we will do it.
Hans?
You asked for specific policies on what would be done to stop those IPOs. Nationwide, it is a reappointment of the EPA director and senior staff. Nationwide, statewide, it is, nationwide, it is exposure of those issues when they come up. Because, as someone else mentioned, they're buried and we just don't hear about them. So they need to be raised, and as a congressman, I would raise those issues nationally so that we can actually be aware of them and stop them. And then nationally, it is protect the California protections that are there. We, for example, almost lost to Trump and Rohrabacher lifting the restrictions for new oil rigs, as well as decommissioning our satellites. But California has restrictions, at least on the front. So I often go to the local government. Thank you.
Dr. Bill?
Thanks, Roger. Thanks to all the candidates for being here tonight and being willing to show up when the Republicans wouldn't. And my question for you is kind of an intersectional question of issues of war and the scandalous expense of our bloated military budget, which I think maybe Dave was getting at, that if any of those resources were applied to renewable energy, healthcare, education, or probably infrastructure, we'd be so much better off. So I'm in particular interested from y'all, if you're willing to commit to vote and stand against these bloated military budgets. Maybe we can start with Colonel Applegate, who's probably got the best credentials for that. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Scott, for giving me the first shot at this. Look, we've all been talking about Citizens United. I've been a civil rights attorney since I got out, resigned my regular commission in Marine Corps in the mid-80s. You only are going to do something about Citizens United when you change the Supreme Court. We got Citizens United with a better court than we've got now. If you think you're going to amend the Constitution, I am not going to lie to anybody up here and say that that is going to happen in my lifetime, because I don't think it would. You can get a Congress that will pass disclosure of where the money is coming from. With respect to the military budget, if you call the right people up from the Pentagon, they'll tell you what they don't want. Congress continues to get away with giving the military what they don't want, more of it, because the budget always gets increased when it gets up on the Hill. Now, you want to know why that happens? It's because when I first joined the Marine Corps, 4 months before Saigon fell, there was 80% of Congress had some military experience. It's down to 15% now. Everybody's trying to fall all over themselves to prove that they're the biggest patriot up on the Hill when they never served, starting with the idiot, the moron administration up there. So you got, I'm sorry, just a little bit of a rant. It's the same way with war. Make Congress vote on military action. If you would have called up the right people that do the op orders everywhere around the world, they're renewed every 18 months. We know the cost in blood, treasure, and duration for practically any operation anywhere in the world. And we're going to tell you, if you ask the right questions, if there's an insurgency, how long are we going to have to be there? Two generations. That's your children and your grandchildren. Trust me, the American public is not warrior-like to stand for that. It's asking the right question. All of us up here will do the right thing, okay? But we need to get people out of their houses to recognize what we can do. And what everybody's saying we need to do is to tell an oligarchy that it really is the chief business leverage in the world, that they're going to keep 95% of their wealth in the ground. I mean, we need to steel ourselves about what that's going to take. Anybody goes up in the Hill and thinks that we're going to be able to end the subsidies to the carbon fuel industry by clicking our fingers, you're going to get pressure like you've never seen. Because I've already seen minimal pressure just in running my second campaign. But that's what it's going to take. It's not, Elon Musk that's the right thing to do. But the Navy and the Marine Corps has been going up to the Hill for 15 years saying, these are the programs we want. We're expeditionary. We want all renewable fuels because it takes a lot of lift and a lot of tonnage on shipping to do our mission once we get somewhere. And we still haven't been able to get any of those things approved up on the Hill. So these gentlemen and ladies that are up here today saying that they're going to fight and battle the carbon fuel oligarchy, we need to use every bit of leverage to convince everyone that it's in their interest. When you say, okay, it's going to cost California $120 for the 12-cent gas tax, that's a pretty good metric, all right? If you tell people 45% of our energy is not, it costs us subsidies, and once you get to $70 per barrel of oil, those subsidies do nothing except put additional profits in the pockets of the carbon fuel oligarchy. Look, I'm a Marine, I'm a trial attorney. I've sued cops. I've seen a lot of bad guys around the world. whenever I start a trial, I want to create who's the bad guy, just like an action movie. The bad guy is the carbon fuel oligarch. And that's what we need to focus on and recognize it's going to be a tough battle, and we need to talk to everybody. Sorry for the rant, but it was, the doc set me up and that was not steady.
Can I go first?
Oh, yeah, okay, you just grab the mic. Kian and Dave, Kian and Alex and Dave.
Yeah, so the military itself has said that climate change is a national security issue, and we need to have a rebalancing. Our military doctrine is built on the idea that we should be able to fight 2.5 wars at one time. It goes back to World War II, it goes back to the Cold War. It's not realistic for the world we face today, where the threats to this country are groups like ISIS, groups that are not state actors who are trying to do us harm. And personally, I'm tired of endless war without end. I'm tired of a war in Afghanistan that has gone on for far too long. And I think most of the people in this room feel the same way. And we need to focus on the problems at home, and that's the environment. And when you talk about the military, when you talk about military spending, there is an incredible amount of waste. Often what happens, there are programs that the military doesn't even want, but it turns out that the chairman of the committee happens to be from that state. So you know what, they're getting every F-15 they can get because the chairman decided, you get this. There's a famous story during World War II. FDR went to the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, explaining why they wanted the Oak Ridge, why they wanted to build it for nuclear weapons, explains why it's so important, and he says, of course, Mr. President, just tell me where in Tennessee you want me to build it. We spend less on research and technology investment than we have done in the history since the 1960s, any time in our history. We want you to spend a huge proportion of our government budget on that. And that's why we help invite the government, help invite the internet. That's why the NIH is responsible for almost every single medical innovation that's come out in this country. And we need to do the same thing when it comes to green energy, because we need an economy that's built on innovation, and we need to make sure that the government is helping make that happen.
So, to paraphrase, I think it was General Mattis in the current administration who said that as we cut our investments in the State Department, we have to buy more ammo. And I think it's worth understanding that Brian Ford, who used to work with the Peace Corps, understands the importance of soft diplomacy. And this investment in soft diplomacy, I think, is where we're going to get more bang for the buck than in the military. And reinvesting in our relationship with the Paris Accord, which is what Brian Ford is very much a supporter of.
I guess so unless I get to echo everyone else, but I agree with everything that was just said. We're spending, I think that we just passed a $700 billion budget on the Pentagon. That is greater on a per capita basis than at the height of the Cold War. As Alex mentioned, we are facing asymmetric threats. More bombs, billion-dollar bombs, more F-35s. They're not going to solve these problems. It's a complete waste of money. I would commit certainly to what Dr. Bill said. Let's cut that fat. Let's cut it significantly. I think we can fund a lot of domestic priorities. There's no need for us, given the types of threats to our security that we face today, to have that type of budget. While at the same time cutting funds to diplomacy, cutting funds to intelligence, it is penny wise and pound foolish.
Okay, we've got at this side Omar and then Tony and Brandon. Okay. Everybody still okay? This is good.
So I don't know if anyone knows this, and maybe even Colonel Applegate doesn't know it, but he's not the only veteran on the panel tonight. The reason Roger put me next to this flag is because I'm an ex-Marine. I'm an ex-Marine captain. I was in the first Gulf War, and I'm a helicopter pilot. We're talking about budgets, and the question was, is the military budget too big? Should we shrink the military budget? I don't know if the military budget is too big. It's probably spending priorities are off for the types of threats that we're facing. We have a lot of spending going on in the country that is, like somebody said earlier, the Pentagon doesn't want these programs, but the congressmen do, because they create jobs in their districts. And we've been doing that for a long time. And do we really need 11 aircraft carriers to fight the war on terrorism? What we really need is more troops. So money needs to be spent, but it may just not be being spent wisely. And somebody made the point that maybe the reason Donald Trump and Dana Rohrabacher like to look like such big tough war hawks is because they're both draft dodgers from the Vietnam War. Okay, both of them had 1Y classifications. Both of them didn't have the time or the inclination to serve their country when it was their turn. But now they're more than happy to send other people's kids to war, even if those wars don't make very much sense. So, sure, this Congress needs a change, and one thing the Congress definitely needs, and I think we've seen this from some of the other congressmen who are already in office, people like Seth Moulton come to mind, we need more veterans in Congress.
I'll be brief. As an advisor to the FBI and CIA, I serve as a first line of defense in national security and counterterrorism matters. I strongly believe that all branches of the military, local law enforcement, and the intelligence communities have to be fully funded and supported. However, that doesn't mean that money should be wasted. I think, and I believe, and I know, that government contractors, when they win a government contract, they think they've won a lottery ticket. And all of a sudden, they think they can build whatever they want, how much they want, without consequence. That has to stop. I think we can maintain the military might that we have without spending as much that we do.
Brandon.
Thank you. I want to give you all something to think about with regard to the size of our military. Think about all of the bases that we have across this country, all of the bases that we have across the world. That is a huge carbon footprint. I don't have the metrics, I don't know how to quantify this, but if we start with reducing the size of our military by not acting as the world's police force, that is going to equate to a reduced carbon footprint. So I think that's personally a great place to start. And to connect this a little bit to our position as the world's police force, which I adamantly disagree with. How many folks last week heard about the brave men and perhaps women that died in Africa last week? And how many people were scratching your head thinking, what are they doing in Africa? So we've got an amazing opportunity to stop being the world's police force, and then that is going to equate to a reduced carbon footprint. Laura?
Just real quickly, $56 billion increase in the military war machine this year. You know, the problem is less than 1 in 5 in Congress are women. And when you've got too many guys in there, they're going to war. You put some women in there, ladies, and we spend money on health care, on education, on jobs. We are the nurturers, and right now we're seeing a country that is way out of whack. Way too many Republicans, but also, sorry guys, way too many men, and we need some women in Congress. Right, ladies?
Let's do this. We'll take, Yuta's been waiting for a little bit. We'll take one more question, and then to the extent that you're able, you can stay afterwards. You can talk to the candidates as you wish. This is just great. This is really fantastic. Yuta?
Yeah, my name is Yuta Gamboa, and I'm part of one of the grassroots groups here in Orange County. And I wanted to bring the subject back to more local issues. You know, we've been talking about our role in the world, and you're all congressional candidates. But it would interest me, as you're also all residents of Orange County, for you to identify some local issues, 1 or 2, that are specific to Orange County, and what your solutions would be for those.
You've heard Doug and Hans bring up San Onofre. I don't think we can talk about that enough. We're burying 3.6 million pounds of nuclear waste in the beach, right here. If we have a Fukushima event, which is not an if, but a when, we will have to evacuate a 50-mile radius, which is 8.5 million people. That is everyone sitting in this room on the Zoom. So this is something that we can fix. This is something the federal government promised to fix back in the 80s with the construction of Yucca Mountain. They put $32 billion aside and then siphoned all of it away. But we can throw that waste on a train and get it out of here. There are 2 facilities that can be finished quickly in West Texas and New Mexico that would take the material. And then we can also work bipartisan in the federal government to get Yucca Mountain finished and open, because this has to be a bipartisan issue. I cannot imagine the Republicans that are going to tell their local communities to go ahead and just bury their nuclear waste in the sand.
Over here we got Kia and Dave, and, oh my gosh, okay.
Thank you. So the first issue I think is really critically important is the issue of offshore drilling. Offshore drilling. I know that Mimi Walters supports it. I know that Donald Trump supports it, and I absolutely do not. And if it was up to me, we would never, ever have offshore drilling in Orange County. The second issue is San Onofre and the nuclear waste. And it is my proposal that if you want to build a nuclear plant, you have to have a plan beforehand that's approved in terms of what you want to do with the waste, because we cannot have a situation like San Onofre where we're burying it right here in Orange County. And the third issue is the Poseidon desalination plant, which I think is a critical issue, and I'm completely opposed to it.
Dave, and then Alex, and then Brendan.
Thinking more locally in 45, so agree with what Kia just said, but I guess I think of community choice energy, which is something that was mentioned earlier by someone, but I think that's an important issue as well. Just that we, at a federal level, we ought to be taking steps to try to promote these things. It's basic economics allowing that choice, allows for economies of scale in alternative energy production and things like that. The second thing, anyone who's driven along 405, we know today that I believe vehicles are now the leading cause of carbon emissions in this country. We see the traffic in our own district, and it's a real problem. Part of that is traffic flow. Part of that is a lack of investment in mass transit. So I think we need to start thinking, I don't think there's a silver bullet here, but we need to start thinking about how to ease congestion and move towards different types of modes of transit rather than just being stuck in traffic in a car.
So, as I mentioned earlier in my initial speech supporting Brian, that he was very much interested in performance-based solutions. And so, I think it's really important that everyone understand where their energy consumption comes from, especially at an individual level, and that's where we're going to have the biggest impact. And Brian Ford understands that. So your energy consumption is basically broken into 3 major categories: heating and cooling, transportation, and everything else dominated by lighting and plug loads. Brian understands as a technologist and entrepreneur that this is all about jobs, jobs, jobs. Lots of jobs in the green building sector, and this is a sector that continues to grow, and that's going to address your heating and cooling concerns. The solar jobs, as I mentioned earlier, over 100,000 people employed here in the state of California, and that's going to address our generation concerns. And electric vehicles and fuel cell vehicles, that's going to address our transportation concerns. And candidate Brian Ford understands all of this, wants to support these sectors, and this is how we're going to have the biggest impact, and we're going to create wealth and opportunity for working families here in the state of California. Thank you.
Thank you for asking that question. You know, locally in the 39th district, one of the biggest issues that's affecting us is the question of whether or not we'll be able to continue to preserve the Coyote Hills open spaces in the city of Fullerton. And this is an issue that Andrew Thorburn feels passionately about. We have the money there allocated by the state. We just need to continue to push our local officials to take the position that they will preserve open spaces with the Coyote Hills land. And then just to echo what Dave had talked about in response also to Dave, the other Dave's question about energy, in terms of the community choice energy programs, you know, if you're able to put the energy production back in the hands of the people who are actually consuming it, that will remove the profit margin right away. And with the increases that we've seen in photovoltaic density and also efficiency, you'll be able to pack you know, higher producing solar cells in a smaller area of space, which then can serve more people. And I think that's a solution that the federal government can do something to you know, increase the attractiveness of cities and other communities and partnerships to engage in that.
Okay.
Could I do one? Just add one quick thing.
Okay.
The only thing that's been missed here, I agree with all of these things, of course, is the battery solutions for infrastructure. So disposition of the energies does require for clean energies a restructuring of our infrastructure for battery technology, as opposed to using flows that aren't regulated by day and magnet like they should be.
So you wanted a local issue?
Yeah.
And a local issue, we just had a man sentenced to 8 consecutive life terms. Does everybody know that? In Orange County? He was the hair salon shooter of Seal Beach, right? He killed 8 people. And we just had Las Vegas, where 59 people were killed and over 500 wounded, which is more casualties than the Colonials had at the Battle of Bunker Hill. So you want to talk about a local issue, maybe it hasn't hurt us too bad yet in Orange County, like it's hurt Colorado and Texas and Florida. But I love Dianne Feinstein as much as anyone. She's a hard worker, and she's been a great senator for the state of California. But she should not be the face of gun control for the Democratic Party. You want a face for gun control in the Democratic Party? Look at this face, right? Ex-Marine, expert shooter in the pistol and rifle. I got my first gun when I was in the 8th grade. And I want a national ban on magazines that hold more than 10 rounds. If we have a ban on magazines that hold more than 10 rounds, there are no more assault weapons. Because in order to be an assault weapon, as the colonel will tell you, you have to have high power, a high rate of fire, and a high capacity magazine. And a 10-round magazine, while a lot, is not like a 30-round magazine or a 50-round magazine, which is what these knuckleheads are out there buying. And they're perfectly normal, right? They're perfectly sane until they pull that trigger for the first time. And now they're crazy. So mental health, addressing mental health is not going to stop mass shootings. I want to stop mass shootings in Orange County and everywhere else.
I interpreted the question to mean 2 climate-related issues. So the first one, I'll say, is the gridlock that we have and the pollution that it's causing. In the entire United States, the East LA interchange, where the 5, 101, 10, 60 all converge, is the most crowded intersection in the country. But what you may not know is that where the 5, 22, and 57 converge also makes the top 10 worst in the country. Anyone who goes through there knows, even if you're in the carpool lane, it's gridlock. That gridlock creates an environmental problem, especially for pollution. I agree that another major issue facing our county is the 510 acres that Chevron is trying to develop in the Coyote Hills in Fullerton. I am the attorney for the Friends of Coyote Hills fighting Chevron. I just filed our appellate brief. The reply briefs from Chevron are due November 2nd. I've been working very closely with Senator Josh Newman, who's fighting this on the legislative side while I'm fighting this in the appellate court. It is a big issue because it is one of the largest pieces of land remaining in Orange County. However, it also sends a signal to Chevron that the residents, whether you're in the 39th, the 48th, the 45th, we will not stand aside. We will fight for our county and our district.
My local issue is clean beaches and clean water. I shared a story with you all about going down to the sand with my children. I have a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old. And if you all who have kids know what they're like at that age, they pick something up and they sometimes want to put it in their mouth. And there have been a number of instances where that's been a cigarette butt or something equally as disgusting. So the idea that I want to put in everyone's mind tonight, and this is something that I practice, is you don't need legislation in all instances to make a difference. I truly believe that we are all accountable in some ways for maintaining our local environment. My campaign, in fact, I believe it was about 2 months ago, we hosted a beach cleanup in the main beach in Corona del Mar. I think we had about 6 or 7 people show up. Each person filled up about half a trash bag full of cigarette butts and all sorts of other disgusting stuff. That's something that we can all do at the local level that's really going to move the needle.
Laura, I give you the last word.
Thank you. Well, I'll make it quick, and as you know, Judah, I've been very involved locally as an activist in my community for years around the environment. And once I'm in Congress, I plan to remain actively involved in all of these local issues with all of your progressive causes, but in particular climate change. So I would love to see these climate action plans happening in every single city in District 48. It would be amazing. And community choice energy at all of our cities in District 48. But in particular, nobody's talked about this yet, the rising seas that are coming from climate change. I mean, look at Puerto Rico right now, and Austin, or not Austin, sorry, Houston and Florida, just the horrible effects of climate change that are going on, and we could see that here in District 48. This is what's going to unify and bring the Republicans on board, because once you start to speak to them about the economic impact of climate change and rising seas and the flooding that's starting to occur with more regular frequency on Balboa Island and Seal Beach and Sunset Beach and Huntington Beach, the damage that's happening to the local infrastructure, when some of those beautiful homes down there on the peninsula start to go underwater. There's some things that we need to address. Right now, the hurricanes typically that come up the West Coast stop right around Cabo San Lucas. They haven't come up too much further. But the way that the energy has been changing, the climate has been changing, we may see those starting to come up a little further. And God forbid, we get some sort of a hurricane activity all the way up this far up the coast. And we're going to see some serious damage to our coast. So I believe that this is something that can unify Republicans and Democrats and help us win Congress. Thank you.
Ron. Yes, one other thing, my 2 cents. One thing I haven't heard yet is fracking. Did you guys know that there's fracking going on in Orange County? Yes. Brea, Yorba Linda, Seal Beach, Placencia. I mean, it's really bad. It's going on right here, under our nose, and we don't know about it. And if you remember when fracking was just beginning to get very popular, it was under the Bush administration. And they drew up a bill to specifically exclude them from the EPA oversight. And so they have very little oversight from the Food and Water Watch, and we can attack this at a different angle. We can say to them, you know what, we can't stop you from doing fracking here, but we have a right to test our water for all the chemicals you're using to do the fracking. So all the water that we reclaim from the land should be able to be tested. If we don't know what chemicals to look for, we're not going to find it. And God knows what kind of chemicals they're using, and they don't have to release that information. But we can take them to court and force them to give us the chemicals just for the water rights. We have a right to the water, and that's an angle that no one's thought about to attack them. I don't hear it from politicians that are in office right now. That is one easy way to solve this problem. Get them to disclose that information, and then now we can actually use that information and say, see, you're destroying the environment too. We have a right to protect our environment, we have a right to do it, and this is a local issue. So that's my 2 cents.
All right. Let's thank all the people that are other issues besides climate, but I think Dr. Bill put it very well. There's an intersectionality of all of these things. And we are a climate group. We do think it's an existential threat, but we care about these other issues as well, obviously. So it was not at all amiss that we got into some of those. Thank you all for coming, and thanks for your patience with the limited seating. And remember to vote, for God's sake, in November 2018. Thank you.